The bounty hunter's hand closed around the boy's wrist with a finality that would echo through decades. And as the child's mother screamed from the doorway of their Sacramento homestead, no one could have known that, 23 years later, that same child would return to unravel the lies that had shaped his entire existence. Sacramento, California hummed with the restless energy of 1867. A city still drunk on gold fever, though the richest veins had long since been stripped bare. The wooden sidewalks clattered with boots and wagon wheels, and the air smelled perpetually of sawdust, horse sweat, and the distant promise of opportunity. It was here that Gabriel Orson rode into town on a dusty August afternoon, his saddlebags heavy with the weight of questions he had carried across 3 territories and a lifetime of half-truths. He was 25 years old, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin, and eyes the color of storm clouds over the Sierra Nevada. His hands bore the calluses of a man who had worked every kind of labor the frontier could offer, from breaking horses to laying railroad track, from cattle drives to mine work. But it was the small leather journal tucked inside his vest that had brought him here, its pages filled with fragments of memory and the dying confession of the man he had called father for 20 years. Gabriel tied his horse outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, not for a drink, but because the building next door housed the Sacramento Land Office. According to the journal, his birth had been registered there in 1842, before everything had been torn apart. Before he had been sold like livestock to a passing wagon train, traded for $60 and a lie about his mother's death. The land office clerk was a nervous man with ink-stained fingers who kept glancing at the gun on Gabriel's hip. "I need to see records from 1842, Gabriel said, keeping his voice level despite the thundering of his heart. "Birth records, property deeds, anything under the name Orson." The clerk disappeared into a back room that smelled of aging paper and mouse droppings. Gabriel stood by the window, watching the street outside. A young woman emerged from the general store across the way, her arms full of parcels wrapped in brown paper. She wore a simple green dress that had been mended carefully at the hem, and her dark hair was pinned up beneath a practical bonnet. Something about the way she moved, with determined efficiency despite her burden, caught his attention. She was halfway across the dusty street when one of her parcels began to slip. Gabriel found himself moving without thinking, pushing through the door and crossing the distance between them in long strides. He caught the falling package just before it hit the ground, a bag of what felt like flour or sugar. "Oh." She looked up at him with eyes the color of honey in sunlight, wide with surprise. "Thank you. I thought I could manage them all, but I suppose pride goes before a fall, as they say." "No shame in accepting help, madam." He steadied the rest of her packages, his hands large and careful around the parcels. Up close, he could see the faint dusting of freckles across her nose, the full curve of her lips, the intelligence in her gaze as she assessed him. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, and there was something in her face that spoke of both kindness and steel. "I'm grateful nonetheless. I'm Alina Orson, and you've saved me from both embarrassment and the cost of replacing a month's worth of supplies." She smiled, and Gabriel felt something shift in his chest, like the turning of a key in a lock he had not known existed. The name hit him like a physical blow. "Orson? Yes, do you know the name? My aunt and uncle run the boarding house on 3rd Street. Well, my aunt does now. My uncle passed 2 years ago." A shadow crossed her face, grief still fresh enough to show. Gabriel's mind raced. The journal had mentioned a brother, his father's sibling, who had stayed in Sacramento. Could this woman be connected to his own blood? "I'm Gabriel Orson." Alina's packages nearly slipped again, and this time it was her own shock that caused it. That's impossible. That's not possible. Gabriel Orson was my cousin, but he died. He was taken when he was just a baby, not even 3 years old. They said he died on the trail somewhere in Nevada. I didn't die. Gabriel's voice came out rough. I was sold. The man I called father all these years, he told me the truth on his deathbed last winter. Told me my real name, told me about Sacramento, about how he'd bought me from a bounty hunter who'd claimed to be taking me to family. It was all lies. The street around them seemed to fade away, the noise of horses and wagons and shouting merchants becoming nothing more than a distant hum. Alina stared at him, her face cycling through disbelief, hope, and a desperate need to believe. "The land office," she said suddenly. "Mr. Winters, the clerk, he has records. My aunt, she kept the birth certificate. She kept everything from that time, could never let go of what happened to her nephew. To you, if you are who you say you are. I'm here looking at those records now." Gabriel glanced back at the land office. "Trying to find proof of what I was told." Alina made a decision, her jaw setting with determination. "Come with me. Bring your packages and we will go to my aunt together. If you truly are Gabriel Orson, if you truly survived and came back, then she deserves to know. She deserves to see you." They loaded Alina's supplies onto Gabriel's horse, and she led the way through Sacramento's dusty streets. The boarding house on 3rd Street was a 2-story structure that had seen better days, but was kept with obvious care. The porch was swept clean, the windows sparkled, and flower boxes held struggling geraniums that fought valiantly against the August heat. An older woman was shaking out a rug when they arrived, her hair more silver than brown, her face lined with the kind of sorrow that never fully heals. She looked up at the sound of their footsteps, her eyes going first to Alina and then to Gabriel. The rug slipped from her fingers. "Aunt Martha," Alina said gently, "this man claims to be Gabriel, your nephew Gabriel." Martha Orson descended the porch steps slowly, as if moving through water. She came close to Gabriel, so close he could see the tears already forming in her eyes. Her hands, work roughened and spotted with age, reached up to touch his face with a gentleness that made his throat tight. "You have your father's eyes," she whispered, "and your mother's chin. I remember the day you were born, remember holding you when you were hours old. And I remember the day you were taken, remember your mother's screams, remember the way the sun felt too bright and the world felt too cruel." Her voice broke. "They told us you died. That man, that bounty hunter, he took money to deliver you to your father's cousin in Nevada, but he never arrived. They searched, found his camp ransacked by bandits. They said you must have died there, that small bones do not always survive the desert. I survived." Gabriel's own voice was unsteady. "I lived. A wagon master named Thomas Cotter bought me from that bounty hunter, said his wife had just lost a baby and was mad with grief. He told everyone I was a foundling, and he told me when I was older that my real parents had died of cholera. It was not until he was dying himself that he confessed the truth, told me my real name, told me about Sacramento." Martha pulled him into an embrace that smelled of lavender and bread dough, and Gabriel found himself holding this stranger who was not a stranger at all, this woman who had mourned him for more than 2 decades. Over her shoulder, he could see Alina watching, tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed to her mouth. The next hours passed in a blur of stories and tears, and the slow construction of truth. Martha brought out a wooden box from her bedroom, filled with the fragments of a life interrupted. There was Gabriel's birth certificate, signed by a midwife, and dated March 15, 1842. There were letters from Gabriel's father to his brother, Martha's late husband, speaking of the child's first words and first steps. There was even a small shirt, carefully preserved, that Martha said Gabriel had been wearing the day he was taken. "Your mother," Martha said as they sat around her kitchen table, coffee growing cold in their cups. "She never recovered. Margaret, she was her name. Margaret Orson. When they told us you were dead, something broke inside her. She died that same winter, and people said it was pneumonia, but I always knew it was a broken heart that killed her." Gabriel absorbed this, adding it to the growing weight of all he had lost without knowing he had lost it. "And my father," Matthias died before Margaret actually. "It was consumption. He was sick even before you were taken, though none of us knew how bad it was. He spent the last of his money hiring men to search for you, died believing you might still be alive out there somewhere." Martha reached across the table to grip Gabriel's hand. He would be so happy to know he was right. Eleanor had been quiet through much of this, but now she spoke up. "Aunt Martha, what about the property?" "Uncle Samuel always said the land should go to Gabriel if he ever returned, that it was his birthright." Martha nodded slowly. "Your father owned a good piece of land outside town, Gabriel. When he died and you were believed dead, it passed to my Samuel as the only living relative. Samuel worked it for years, built it up into a decent ranch, but he always maintained that it belonged to you by rights, should you live. When he died, he left it to me with the instruction that if you or any heir of Matthias Orson ever appeared with proof of claim, the land was theirs." Gabriel felt the weight of this new knowledge settle over him. He had come to Sacramento seeking truth, seeking the story of his beginning. He had not expected to find living family, to find property, to find a cousin whose eyes seemed to look straight into his soul and see things he had not known were there. "I do not want to take anything from you," he said to Martha. "You and your husband cared for that land. It's yours." "Nonsense." Martha's voice was firm. "Samuel would never forgive me if I kept what was rightfully yours. Besides, I'm an old woman. This boarding house keeps me busy enough. Eleanor helps me run it, and we do just fine. That ranch needs young blood, needs someone who can build something lasting." Eleanor cleared her throat. "The ranch has been leased out the last 2 years since Uncle Samuel passed, to the Hartley brothers. They have been good tenants, pay on time, keep the place maintained, but the lease is up at the end of this month." Gabriel looked at her, at the way the late afternoon light coming through the kitchen window turned her hair to burnished copper, at the directness of her gaze. "Have you seen the place recently? I ride out once a month to check on things and collect the lease payment. I was planning to go tomorrow, actually." She paused, then added, "You could come with me if you like, see your father's land, see what your birthright looks like. I would like that." The words came easily, though beneath them ran a current of something deeper, something that had to do with the way Eleanor's presence made him feel simultaneously off balance and more grounded than he had felt in years. That evening, Martha insisted Gabriel stay at the boarding house rather than seek accommodation elsewhere. "You are family," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. "Family does not pay for rooms." She set him up in a comfortable space on the second floor, and after he had washed away the trail dust and changed into clean clothes, he joined Martha and Eleanor for dinner. The meal was simple but well prepared: roast chicken and potatoes and greens from Martha's small garden plot. They ate in the boarding house dining room, just the 3 of them at one end of a long table that could seat a dozen. 2 other boarders, miners who worked claims in the nearby foothills, were out for the evening. "Tell us about your life," Martha urged. "Tell us everything. I want to know who you became, even if it was not the life we would have wished for you." So Gabriel told them. He spoke of growing up on the wagon train, of how Thomas and Sarah Cotter had raised him as their own. He spoke of learning to handle horses and cattle, of the hard lessons of frontier life. He told them about Sarah's death when he was 12, about how Thomas had grown harder after that, more distant. He spoke of the years spent drifting after leaving the Cotter camp, of working whatever jobs would have him, of slowly building a reputation as a man who could handle difficult horses and harder situations. Alina listened intently, asking questions that showed she was truly hearing him, not just waiting for her turn to speak. "It must have been so strange," she said, "learning that everything you believed about your origins was false. Did it make you angry? Angry does not begin to cover it." Gabriel set down his fork, his appetite fading as he remembered those first days after Thomas's confession. "I felt like my entire life had been built on sand. Everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie. I spent weeks just trying to breathe through the rage, trying to figure out what to do with it. Thomas was already dead, so there was no one to confront. The bounty hunter who sold me, he could be dead 20 years by now. All I could do was come here and try to find the truth, try to find some piece of solid ground to stand on." Alina reached across the table, her hand covering his. The touch was brief but electric, sending awareness racing up his arm. "You found it," she said. "You found us. You found your family, your history. That's solid ground, Gabriel. That's real." Her hand withdrew, but the warmth of her touch remained. Gabriel found himself studying her face, the earnestness in her expression, the compassion that seemed to radiate from her like heat from a fire. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was a quality to her that drew him in, made him want to know every thought in her head, every story she had to tell. "What about you?" he asked. "Martha said you help run the boarding house, but what else? What is your story, Alina Orson?" A faint blush colored her cheeks. "My story is far less dramatic than yours, I am afraid. I was born here in Sacramento. My father was Uncle Samuel's younger brother, so you and I are second cousins, I suppose. My parents died in a fire when I was 15. Aunt Martha and Uncle Samuel took me in, and I have been here ever since, helping with the boarding house, helping with the ranch when Uncle Samuel was alive. It is a simple life, but it is mine, and I am content with it." "Content is not the same as happy," Gabriel observed. Alina met his gaze, something flickering in her amber eyes. "No, it is not. But happiness can be a scarce commodity in this world, so I have learned to appreciate contentment when I find it. You deserve more than contentment." The words came out before Gabriel could think better of them, carrying more weight than he had intended. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with sudden possibility. Martha, watching this exchange with obvious interest, cleared her throat gently. "Alina is one of the finest women in Sacramento," she said, "though she is too modest to say so herself. She teaches reading to the children at the church on Sunday afternoons. She tends to anyone who falls ill in the boarding house like they were her own kin, and she has a head for numbers that would put most bankers to shame." "Aunt Martha, please." Alina's blush deepened. "You will give Gabriel the wrong impression." "I doubt that." Gabriel smiled and was rewarded by the way Alina's eyes widened slightly, her breath catching in a way that told him he was not alone in feeling this pull between them. The next morning dawned clear and already warm, promising another scorching August day. Gabriel woke early from habit, dressed, and made his way downstairs to find Alina already in the kitchen, packing supplies into saddlebags. She wore a split riding skirt and a practical cotton blouse, her hair in a long braid down her back. She looked up when he entered, and her smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I thought we would make a day of it," she said. "The ranch is about an hour's ride northwest of town. We can have lunch there, look over everything properly, and be back before dark." Sounds perfect. Gabriel accepted the cup of coffee she poured for him, their fingers brushing during the exchange. He was beginning to think that any excuse to touch her, however brief, was worth seeking out. They set out after a breakfast of eggs and toast, riding side by side through Sacramento's waking streets and then out into the countryside beyond. The land here was different from the harsh deserts and mountains Gabriel had spent recent years traversing. The Sacramento Valley was green even in summer, watered by the great river and its tributaries, dotted with oak trees and interrupted by stretches of grassland where cattle grazed. Alina rode well, sitting her dappled mare with easy confidence. "Uncle Samuel taught me," she explained when Gabriel commented on it. "He said a woman in California needed to be able to ride as well as any man, that you never knew when it might save your life." He was right about that. Gabriel had seen enough of the frontier to know that survival often came down to practical skills and quick thinking. "You are lucky to have had him." "I was. He was a good man, stern sometimes, but always fair. When my parents died, he did not just take me in out of obligation. He made me feel wanted, made me feel like I belonged. Aunt Martha too, of course, but Uncle Samuel, he treated me like the daughter he never had." Alina's voice softened with memory. "I miss him every day." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic clop of hooves, the creak of saddle leather, and the occasional call of a meadowlark. Gabriel found himself acutely aware of Alina's presence beside him, the way she moved with her horse, the way the wind teased loose strands of hair from her braid. "Can I ask you something?" Alina's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Anything. What are you going to do now? Now that you know the truth, now that you have found your family and your land. What comes next for Gabriel Orson?" It was a question Gabriel had been asking himself since the moment Martha had confirmed his identity. "Honestly, I do not know. I came here for answers and I found more than I expected. A few days ago, I had nothing but a horse and some saved wages. Now I apparently have family and property. It is overwhelming. But good overwhelming, I hope." Alina glanced at him, her expression open and hopeful. "Very good overwhelming." Gabriel smiled. "Particularly the family part. I spent so many years feeling like I did not quite belong anywhere, like I was always on the outside looking in. To find out I have roots, a place that was meant to be mine, people who mourned me and remembered me, it is more than I let myself hope for. We are glad you came back." The simplicity of Alina's words carried profound meaning. "I am glad you came back." Before Gabriel could respond, the ranch came into view. It was situated on a gentle rise overlooking a creek lined with willows and cottonwoods. The house was a sturdy wooden structure, single-story but spacious, with a wide porch and a stone chimney. Outbuildings included a large barn, a stable, a smokehouse, and several other structures in good repair. Fences marked out paddocks and pastures where a few dozen cattle grazed. It was not a grand spread, but it was substantial, the kind of place a man could build a life on. "The Hartley brothers have taken good care of it," Alina said as they rode up the main path. "They have been wanting to buy it, actually. They have made several offers over the last year." "What did you tell them?" "That it was not for sale, that it was family land and would remain so." Alina dismounted near the house, and Gabriel followed suit. "I hope I did not overstep, but it seemed wrong to let it go to strangers when there was always the chance that you might exist somewhere, might come back." Gabriel felt a rush of warmth toward this woman who had preserved his inheritance, who had believed in the possibility of his survival even without proof. "You did exactly right." They spent the next hour exploring the property. The house was dusty from being unoccupied but otherwise in good condition, with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a sitting room with a large stone fireplace. Alina pointed out repairs that had been made over the years, told stories about meals shared here when her uncle was alive, brought the empty rooms to life with memory. "My father built this house himself," Gabriel said quietly, running his hand along a door frame, feeling the solidity of the wood. "He hammered these nails, planed these boards, and I never knew him, never got the chance to know him." Alina came to stand beside him, close enough that her shoulder nearly touched his arm. "He knew you, though. For those first years he knew you. He loved you. That matters, Gabriel. That love does not disappear just because the time was cut short. How did you get to be so wise?" Gabriel looked down at her, at the certainty in her face. "I am not wise. I just know what it is to lose people you love, and I know that the love itself never dies. It stays with you, becomes part of who you are." She held his gaze, and in that moment, Gabriel realized with startling clarity that he was falling in love with his cousin. This brave, kind, intelligent woman who had kept faith with a ghost, who spoke of loss with such grace, who looked at him like he was not a man with a stolen past, but simply a man worth knowing. The realization should have been shocking, but instead it felt inevitable, like something that had been building since the moment he had caught her falling packages on the dusty Sacramento street. They were family, yes, but distant enough that the connection was more about shared history than close blood. Second cousins, Martha had said. Not so close that his feelings were wrong, but close enough that Alina would understand him in ways few others could. "Alina," he began, but she suddenly stepped back, breaking the spell between them. "We should check the barn and the fences before we eat," she said, her voice a little too bright. "The Hartley brothers said one of the fence lines was getting weak, and I want to see if they have addressed it." Gabriel recognized retreat when he saw it. Recognized, too, that Alina was not running from him, but from the feelings that crackled between them like lightning before a storm. He let her go, followed her outside into the blazing sunlight, and told himself there would be time. He had spent 23 years not knowing where he came from. He could spend a few more days letting Alina come to terms with whatever she was feeling. They inspected fences, checked on the cattle, examined the barn with its sturdy loft and neat arrangement of tools and tack. The Hartley brothers had indeed been good tenants, keeping everything in excellent order. When they finally settled on the porch to eat the lunch Alina had packed, the sun was high and hot, and Gabriel felt the bone-deep satisfaction of a man surveying land that belonged to him. "You are going to stay, are not you?" Alina asked around a bite of bread and cheese. "You are going to keep the ranch?" "I think so." Gabriel had not been certain until this moment, but saying it out loud made it real. "I have spent enough years drifting. Maybe it is time to put down roots, build something that lasts. My father did that here. Maybe I can do the same." Alina's smile was brilliant, transforming her entire face. "I think that is wonderful, and Aunt Martha will be so pleased. She is worried about this place sitting empty or falling into the wrong hands. What about you?" Gabriel leaned back against the porch railing, studying her. "Are you pleased?" She looked away, out toward the pastures where cattle grazed in the afternoon heat. "Yes," she said softly. "I am pleased, more than I probably should be." "Why should not you be pleased?" "Because it is complicated." Alina turned back to him, and there was a vulnerability in her expression that made Gabriel's chest tighten. "You are my cousin. You are family." "I should not be feeling," she broke off, shaking her head. "Never mind. Ignore me. The heat must be affecting my brain." Gabriel set down his canteen and shifted closer, near enough to see the gold flecks in her amber eyes. "What should not you be feeling, Gabriel?" His name was a whisper, a warning, a plea. "Tell me I am imagining things." His voice was low, intense. Tell me I am making up the way you look at me, the way the air changes when we are near each other. Tell me you do not feel this pull between us, and I will back away. I will be just your cousin, just your family, nothing more." Eleanor's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I cannot tell you that. I cannot tell you that because it would be a lie, and I am tired of lies. I have felt it since the moment you caught my packages, since the moment I looked up and saw you standing there like an answer to a prayer I did not know I had been praying." A single tear escaped, tracking down her cheek. "But we are family, Gabriel. We share blood. It is not right. We are second cousins. That is legal, Eleanor. People marry second cousins all the time, especially out here where communities are small and options are limited." Gabriel reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed the tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I am not saying we should rush into anything. I have been back in your life for less than a day. But I am saying that what I feel is real, and if you feel even a fraction of the same, then maybe we owe it to ourselves to see where this leads. You are supposed to be focused on reclaiming your life, on settling into your inheritance, on making peace with your past." Eleanor's protest was weak, undermined by the way she leaned into his touch. "Maybe you are part of reclaiming my life." Gabriel's hand moved from her cheek to cup the back of her neck, his fingers warm against her skin. "Maybe finding you is part of finding myself." Eleanor's resistance crumbled. She closed the distance between them, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, and when their lips met, it was like coming home. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question posed and answered. Then it deepened, becoming something more urgent, more necessary. Gabriel pulled her closer, and Eleanor came willingly, pressing against him like she could somehow merge their two bodies into one. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor rested her forehead against Gabriel's chest. "This is crazy," she murmured. "We barely know each other." "Then let us fix that." Gabriel pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, soap and sunshine, and something uniquely Eleanor. "Let us take the time to know each other properly. I am not going anywhere, Eleanor. I am staying in Sacramento, staying on this ranch. We have all the time in the world." They rode back to town in the golden light of late afternoon, and if they stayed closer together than strictly necessary, if their hands brushed more often than accident could account for, neither of them mentioned it. When they reached the boarding house, Martha took one look at their faces and smiled, a small, knowing smile that suggested she had been expecting exactly this development. The next weeks unfolded with the slow sweetness of a dream Gabriel was afraid to wake from. He took official possession of the ranch, signed papers at the land office that confirmed his identity and his claim. The Hartley brothers, while disappointed about not being able to purchase the property, agreed to stay on as hired hands, their experience and knowledge invaluable to Gabriel as he learned the particulars of running a working ranch. He spent his days riding fence lines, tending cattle, making repairs and improvements to the property. But his evenings belonged to Eleanor. She would ride out after finishing her work at the boarding house, and they would watch the sunset from the porch of the ranch house, talking about everything and nothing. Gabriel learned that Eleanor had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. He discovered that she had taught herself to read Latin from books in the church library, that she wanted to travel to San Francisco someday to see the ocean, that she had a terrible fear of spiders but would never admit it to anyone else. She learned in turn that Gabriel had a habit of humming tunelessly when he worked, that he had read every one of the battered dime novels in his saddlebags at least 3 times, that he carved small wooden figures when he needed to think, his knife revealing horses and cattle and birds from blocks of soft pine. They took picnics to the creek, swam in its cold water during the hottest part of the day, and lay on the bank afterward letting the sun dry their skin. Gabriel taught Alina to throw a knife with accuracy, and she taught him a complicated card game her uncle had learned from a Chinese merchant. They talked about the past and the future, about dreams and disappointments, about all the small details that transform strangers into intimates. Martha watched these developments with obvious approval, though she was careful never to pressure either of them. "Young people need to find their own way," she told Gabriel one evening when Alina had stayed late at the ranch to help him inventory supplies. "But I will say that I have not seen Alina this happy since before her parents died. You are good for her, Gabriel, and she is good for you. I want to marry her." The words came out before Gabriel had fully formed the thought, but once spoken, he knew they were absolutely true. "Is that moving too fast? We have only known each other a month. When it is right, it is right." Martha patted his hand. "Samuel proposed to me after 3 weeks, and we had 40 good years together before the fever took him. Time is not always the measure of love. Sometimes you just know." Gabriel knew. He knew in the way his day felt incomplete until Alina arrived, in the way her laughter seemed to light him up from the inside, in the way her presence beside him felt like the most natural thing in the world. He had spent his whole life feeling displaced, always slightly out of step with wherever he found himself. With Alina, he was home. He proposed on a September evening when the heat had finally broken and the air smelled of autumn. They were sitting on the porch steps watching the stars emerge, Alina's head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. Gabriel had been carrying his mother's ring for a week, waiting for the right moment. The ring had been among the items in Martha's wooden box, preserved all these years against hope. "Alina," he said, "I need to ask you something." She lifted her head, looking at him with those amber eyes that had become the center of his world. "What is it?" Gabriel shifted, reaching into his pocket and pulling out the simple gold band. "This was my mother's. Martha gave it to me and said that Margaret would have wanted me to have it to give it to the woman I loved." He held the ring between his thumb and forefinger, letting it catch the last light of the setting sun. "I love you, Gabriel Orson. I love your strength and your kindness and your terrible fear of spiders that you think no one knows about. I love the way you see the best in people, the way you kept faith with a ghost, the way you look at me like I am someone worth loving. I want to spend the rest of my life earning that look. Will you marry me?" Alina's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling, a smile so wide and radiant it seemed to illuminate the gathering darkness. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Gabriel, I will marry you. I love you. I think I have loved you since that first moment when you caught my packages and looked at me like I was the most interesting thing you had ever seen." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for exactly this moment. Then he kissed her, deep and slow and full of promise, and Alina kissed him back with a fervor that made his blood sing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alina laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Aunt Martha is going to be insufferable," she said. "She has been predicting this since the day you arrived. Let her be insufferable." Gabriel pulled Alina close again, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Let the whole world be insufferable. I do not care about anything except you and me and the life we are going to build together." They were married in October, in the small church where Alina taught children their letters. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by Martha, the Hartley brothers, the boarding house residents, and a scattering of Sacramento townsfolk who had known the Orson family for years. Alina wore a dress of cream-colored silk that had belonged to her mother, and Gabriel wore a new suit that made him feel slightly ridiculous, until he saw the way Alina looked at him when he stood at the altar. The Reverend spoke of love and commitment, of the bonds that tie families together, and the new bonds being forged this day. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Gabriel kissed Alina with a tenderness that made several ladies in the congregation dab at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the boarding house, with Martha having cooked for days to prepare a feast. There was roast beef and potatoes, fresh bread and butter, vegetables from the garden, and 3 different kinds of pie. The dining room overflowed with food and laughter, and the clinking of glasses as toast after toast was raised to the happy couple. As the evening wound down and guests began to drift away, Martha pulled Gabriel aside. Her eyes were bright with tears, but her smile was steady. "Your father would be so proud of you," she said quietly. "And your mother, she would have loved Alina. She would have loved seeing you happy and settled, seeing you claim the life that should have been yours all along. I wish they could be here." Gabriel's voice was rough with emotion. "I wish I had gotten the chance to know them. They are here, in a way." Martha placed her hand over Gabriel's heart. "They live on in you, in the man you became despite everything that was taken from you. And they will live on in your children, in the family you and Alina will build on the land your father cleared." Gabriel thought about that, as he and Alina finally escaped the boarding house and rode out to the ranch under a sky full of stars. The thought of children, of building a family with Alina, filled him with a fierce joy tempered by the weight of all he had lost. He had been stolen as a child, denied the chance to know his parents, denied the life they had envisioned for him. But he had survived. He had found his way back. And now he had the chance to create something lasting, to put down roots so deep they could never be torn up. Alina seemed to sense his thoughts. As they dismounted in front of the ranch house, she took his hand and held it tight. "No more looking back," she said firmly. "We look forward from here, Gabriel. We build our life, raise our family, and we make sure our children never doubt where they come from or who loves them." Our children. Gabriel tested the words, liking the weight of them. "How many children do you want, Mrs. Orson?" Alina's smile turned impish. "At least 4. This house has 3 bedrooms, and it seems a shame to leave them empty." Gabriel laughed, sweeping her up in his arms and carrying her across the threshold into their home. "4 it is, though we should probably start with 1 and see how we manage." That night, in the house his father had built, Gabriel and Alina began the work of creating their future. They came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention they had brought to learning each other's hearts and minds. And afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Alina's head on Gabriel's chest and his arms wrapped around her, Gabriel felt a sense of peace he had never known before. "I am home," he whispered into her hair. "For the first time in my life, I am really home." "We both are," Alina murmured back, already half asleep. "We are home together." The first years of their marriage unfolded with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Gabriel and Alina worked side by side, building their herd, improving their land, slowly transforming the ranch from something good into something exceptional. The Hartley brothers proved to be loyal employees and good friends, their expertise helping Gabriel avoid the worst mistakes of inexperience. Alina managed the household with the same efficiency she had brought to running Martha's boarding house, but she was also a full partner in the ranch operations. She had a head for numbers and could calculate profit margins and feed costs faster than Gabriel could write them down. She also had an eye for good cattle, able to spot promising calves and breeding stock with uncanny accuracy. They made trips to Sacramento regularly, staying at the boarding house with Martha, who was delighted to have them, and insisted on treating Alina like she was still the girl who needed feeding up. These visits kept them connected to family and community, prevented the isolation that could afflict those who lived too far from town. In the spring of 1869, Alina discovered she was pregnant. Gabriel received the news with a whoop of joy that spooked the horse he was shoeing, sending it skittering sideways and earning him a reproachful look from Alina. "You will wake the baby before it is even born with all that noise," she said. But she was smiling, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through summer and into fall. Alina refused to be treated like an invalid, continuing to help with ranch work until Gabriel finally put his foot down in her 7th month and insisted she limit herself to lighter duties. She grumbled about it but secretly seemed relieved, her energy flagging as the baby grew heavy inside her. Martha came to stay with them as Alina's time approached, bringing her experience and calm competence. When Alina's labor began on a cold November night, Martha sent one of the Hartley brothers racing to town for the midwife, while she settled Alina in the bedroom and began the wait. Gabriel felt useless, pacing the sitting room while Alina's labored breathing and occasional cries came through the bedroom door. He wanted to be with her, but Martha had firmly informed him that birthing rooms were no place for nervous husbands who were likely to faint at the first sight of blood. The labor was long, stretching through the night and into the gray dawn. Gabriel wore a path in the floorboards with his pacing, praying to a God he was not entirely sure he believed in, bargaining with fate the way men do when someone they love is in danger. He thought about his mother, about Margaret dying when he was too young to remember her face. He thought about how unfair it would be for history to repeat itself, for Alina to be taken from him just as they were building their life together. When a thin, angry wail finally pierced the morning air, Gabriel nearly collapsed with relief. The bedroom door opened and the midwife emerged, tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Orson. A big, healthy boy, and your wife is doing fine, though she will appreciate some rest." Gabriel barely heard anything past the word son. He brushed past the midwife into the bedroom where Alina lay propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale with exhaustion. But her eyes were bright as she looked down at the tiny bundle in her arms, and when she looked up at Gabriel, her smile was transcendent. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Gabriel crossed to the bed on unsteady legs, sitting carefully on the edge of the mattress. Alina shifted the baby so Gabriel could see him properly, a tiny red face scrunched up with the outrage of new life, a shock of dark hair, miniature fists waving. "He was perfect. What should we name him?" Alina asked. "I was thinking maybe Matthias after your father, unless you would prefer something else." Gabriel felt his throat tighten. To have his son carry his father's name, to keep that connection alive across the generations, felt right in a way he could not articulate. "Matthias is perfect. Matthias Gabriel Orson." Alina shifted the baby toward Gabriel, and he took his son with careful hands, terrified of dropping him or holding him wrong. But the infant settled into his arms with surprising ease, the wailing quieting to small snuffling sounds. Gabriel looked down at this tiny person he had helped create, at the evidence of his and Alina's love made flesh, and felt the last piece of his fractured past slide into place. He was not the stolen child anymore, not the boy sold for $60 and a lie. He was Gabriel Orson, husband and father, landowner and rancher. He was the man his parents would have wanted him to be, even if they had never gotten the chance to see it. And now he had his own child, his own chance to do what his parents had been denied, to raise his son with love and certainty, to give him the security Gabriel himself had lost. "Hello, Matthias," he whispered to the baby. "Welcome home." The years that followed were full in the way that good years are, filled with hard work and small joys, with setbacks overcome and triumphs celebrated. Matthias grew from infant to toddler to small boy, his dark hair and gray eyes marking him clearly as Gabriel's son. He learned to walk in the ranch house Gabriel's father had built, learned to ride on a gentle mare that Alina picked out specifically for him, learned the rhythms of ranch life as naturally as breathing. In 1871, Alina gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Gabriel's mother. She had Alina's amber eyes and a temperament that combined her mother's steadiness with her father's determination. 2 years later came another son, Samuel, named for Alina's uncle. And in 1875, their fourth and final child arrived, a daughter named Martha, completing the family Alina had envisioned that first night in the ranch house. The house expanded to accommodate them, Gabriel adding rooms and a second story, with the help of the Hartley brothers and other neighbors who appeared, when word spread that the Orsons needed help. It was the way of things in the valley, everyone looking out for everyone else, communities bound together by necessity and mutual respect. Martha the elder became Aunt Martha to all the children, a beloved fixture in their lives. She lived to see all 4 of Gabriel and Alina's children born, watching with satisfaction as the family she had mourned grew and flourished. She passed peacefully in her sleep in 1876, at the age of 73, leaving the boarding house to Alina, and a letter for Gabriel that he kept in his desk drawer and reread whenever he needed to remember where he came from. The letter spoke of love and loss, of the miracle of his return, of how proud his parents would have been. It spoke of Alina's strength and grace, of the children who would carry the Orson name forward, of the ranch that had come back to its rightful heir. And it ended with a simple line that Gabriel memorized. "You were stolen from us, but love brought you home. Never forget that love is stronger than any lie, than any loss. Love endures." Gabriel thought about those words often as he watched his children grow. He told them the story of his past, wanting them to understand the weight of their heritage, the fragility of the life they took for granted. He told them about the grandfather they would never meet, about the grandmother who had loved them before they existed. He told them about Aunt Martha and Uncle Samuel, about the people who had kept faith and preserved his inheritance. And he told them about their mother, about how she had been the first person to believe he was who he said he was, about how her love had been the anchor that allowed him to finally stop drifting and put down roots. Alina would roll her eyes at his embellishments, but Gabriel could see the pleasure in her face when he spoke of her that way. The ranch prospered under their stewardship, growing from a modest operation into one of the most respected spreads in the Sacramento Valley. Gabriel built his reputation on honesty and fair dealing, on hard work and innovation. He was known as a man whose word was his bond, who treated his hired hands with respect, who could gentle a difficult horse better than anyone else in 3 counties. Alina became known in her own right as a woman of sharp intelligence and kind heart, someone who could be counted on in times of trouble. She continued teaching reading at the church, expanded the program to include adults who had never had the chance to learn. She tended the sick, sat with the dying, welcomed newcomers to the valley with the same warmth she had once shown a stranger claiming to be her long-lost cousin. Together, they built not just a ranch but a legacy. They built something that would endure beyond them, something that their children and grandchildren could point to with pride. And they built it on the foundation of a love that had started with dropped packages on a dusty street and grown into something that shaped every aspect of their lives. By the time Gabriel reached his 40th birthday in 1882, he had lived in Sacramento longer than he had lived anywhere else. The stolen years of his childhood had receded, becoming less the defining fact of his existence and more simply one chapter in a longer story. He still thought sometimes about the bounty hunter who had sold him, about Thomas Cotter who had bought him, about the cascade of decisions and circumstances that had separated him from his birthright. But mostly he thought about what he had gained: a wife he loved more with each passing year, children who were healthy and happy, a home that was truly his. He thought about the full circle his life had traced, from being taken from this land as a toddler to returning as a man to claim what had always been his. He thought about destiny and choice, about how sometimes the two were impossible to separate. "You ever regret it?" Alina asked him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained through nearly 15 years of marriage. The children were inside finishing their lessons. The ranch was quiet in the evening calm, and the sky was painted in shades of gold and crimson. "Regret what?" Gabriel had his arm around her shoulders, her head resting in the hollow of his collarbone, fitting together like puzzle pieces. "Coming back, finding the truth. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been easier to just let the past stay buried, to keep believing you were Thomas Cotter's foundling son." Gabriel considered this carefully. "No," he said finally. "I do not regret it. The truth was hard, but it was necessary. I spent too many years feeling like I did not quite fit anywhere, like something fundamental about me was wrong or missing. Finding out why, learning where I came from, it answered questions I did not even know I was asking. And it brought me to you, which makes everything else worthwhile." Alina tilted her head back to look up at him, her amber eyes soft in the fading light. "You would have been fine without me. You are strong, Gabriel. You would have found your way. Maybe." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "But I would not have been happy, not the way I am happy with you. You are not just part of my life, Alina. You are the best part of my life, sweet talker." But Alina was smiling, the kind of smile that had become Gabriel's favorite sight in all the world. "What did I do to deserve you? You kept faith with a ghost. You believed in the possibility of miracles, and when that miracle showed up on your doorstep, you were brave enough to believe in it." Gabriel's voice was serious now, the teasing gone. "You saved me, Alina, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Alina corrected. "That is what love does. It saves us from loneliness and despair and the weight of our own histories. It makes us better than we were, stronger than we could be alone." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. From inside the house came the sound of children's laughter, Matthias teasing Margaret about something, Samuel's higher voice joining in. Soon, they would need to go inside, to help with bedtime rituals and listen to prayers and tuck small bodies under quilts. But for this moment, they simply existed together. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something lasting from the fragments of a broken past. Gabriel thought about the journey that had brought him here, about the long road from that Sacramento homestead, where a bounty hunter's hand had closed around a toddler's wrist. He thought about the lies he had been told and the truth he had uncovered about loss and recovery, about the way fate sometimes worked in circles, bringing you back to where you started but transforming you along the way. He thought about his father Matthias, who had spent his last money searching for a son he would never find, and about his mother Margaret, whose heart had broken beyond repair. He hoped, wherever they were, they could see him now. Could see the life he had built on the land his father had cleared, could see the woman he had married and the children who carried their name forward, could see that the boy who had been stolen had finally, against all odds, come home. "Thank you," he said quietly to Alina. For what? For being here when I arrived, for believing me, for loving me, for giving me a family and a future and a reason to stay. Gabriel tightened his arm around her shoulders. For everything. Alina's hand found his, their fingers interlacing with the practiced ease of 15 years of marriage. You are welcome, she said simply. Though I think we both know I am the lucky one in this arrangement. We are both lucky, Gabriel countered, lucky beyond measure. As the stars multiplied overhead and the evening air grew cool, they finally rose and went inside to their children, to the warm lamplight and familiar chaos of family life. And if Gabriel paused in the doorway to look back at the land spreading out in all directions, land that had been his father's and was now his and would someday be his children's, no one remarked on it. Alina simply took his hand and led him inside, closing the door on the darkness and keeping the light where it belonged, within the walls of the home they had built together. The years continued to pass with the steady inevitability of seasons turning. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and paths. Matthias, the eldest, took to ranching with natural aptitude, following Gabriel around from the time he could walk and soaking up everything his father could teach him. By his 16th birthday, he could handle almost any task on the ranch, and Gabriel found himself relying on his son's strong back and quick mind more and more. Margaret, true to her namesake's spirit, proved to have a gift for healing. She was the one the hands came to when they were injured or ill, trusting her steady hands and calm demeanor. Alina began teaching her more formal medical knowledge, recognizing that her daughter had a calling, and by the time Margaret was 18, she had become the valley's unofficial nurse, riding out to help anyone who needed her. Samuel inherited his mother's head for numbers and his father's work ethic, becoming indispensable in managing the ranch's finances and business dealings. And young Martha, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by developing a passion for horses that exceeded even Gabriel's. By the time she was 12, she could ride anything with 4 legs, and her skill at training difficult horses became almost legendary in the valley. Gabriel and Alina watched their children's growth with pride and occasional trepidation, knowing that someday they would leave to build their own lives. But they also knew they had given them something precious: roots, identity, certainty about where they came from and who they were. No one would steal these children's histories, would leave them adrift and uncertain as Gabriel had been. In 1885, when Gabriel was 43 and Alina 41, they celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary with a party that seemed to include half of Sacramento. The ranch house rang with music and laughter, with neighbors and friends who had become family over the years. The Hartley brothers, now gray-haired but still working the ranch, raised glasses in toast after toast. The church reverend gave a speech about enduring love that made Alina blush and Gabriel grin. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Gabriel found himself alone with Alina on the porch once more, the same spot where they had spent so many evenings over the years. She looked almost the same as she had that day he had caught her packages on the Sacramento street. Perhaps a few lines around her eyes and threads of silver in her hair, but still beautiful, still the center of his world. 15 years, Alina said, leaning against the porch railing and looking out at the land silvered by moonlight. Sometimes it feels like 15 minutes, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. I know what you mean. Gabriel came to stand beside her, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that had become automatic over the years. Hard to remember what life was like before you. Lonelier, I imagine. Alina glanced at him, her amber eyes reflecting the moon. For both of us, much lonelier. Gabriel pulled her close, and they stood wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle and the chorus of crickets. "I love you, Alina. I have loved you since the moment you smiled at me on that dusty street. And I will love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that, if such things are possible. They are possible." Alina's voice was muffled against his chest. "Love like ours does not end just because life does. It goes on, through our children and their children, through the land we have cared for and the lives we have touched. We are building something eternal, Gabriel. You know that, don't you?" He did know it. Could feel it in the bones of the house his father had built, in the soil his family had worked for generations, in the laughter of his children, and the steady beat of Alina's heart against his own. He had been stolen from this place, but destiny, or fate, or simple stubborn love had brought him back. And what he had built upon his return would endure long after he was gone. The months rolled into years, and the rhythm of their lives continued. Matthias married a girl from Sacramento, a sweet-faced young woman named Anne who fit into the family as if she had always been there. They built a house on the far edge of the ranch property, and soon Gabriel and Alina were grandparents, welcoming Matthias and Anne's son into the world with the same joy they had felt at the birth of their own children. Margaret eventually married as well, a young doctor who had come west from Boston and fallen in love with both the California landscape and the extraordinary young woman who seemed to know as much about medicine as he did. They stayed in Sacramento, opening a proper medical practice, but Margaret remained close to the ranch and to her family. Samuel and Martha were slower to settle. Samuel focused on business ventures and Martha on her horses. But Gabriel and Alina did not worry. Their children had been raised with love and security, given every advantage. They would find their paths in their own time. By 1890, as the century drew toward its close, Gabriel found himself in the odd position of being an elder statesman of the valley. Young ranchers sought his advice. His opinion carried weight in county discussions. And his story, the tale of the stolen child who had returned to claim his birthright, had become something of a legend. He was still strong and capable at 48, but he had begun to cede more of the daily ranch operations to Matthias, recognizing that his son was ready to take over and that holding on too tightly served no one. It was bittersweet, this slow stepping back, but it was also right. This had always been about building something that would last beyond himself, and now he could see that work bearing fruit. Alina, for her part, had expanded her teaching work to include a small school that met at the ranch 3 days a week, educating not just the Orson children but the children of ranch hands and neighboring families. She had never lost her belief in the power of knowledge, her certainty that reading and writing could change lives. Gabriel loved watching her with her students, seeing the patience and care she brought to each lesson. One evening in late summer, with the air finally cooling after another scorching day, Gabriel and Alina took a walk along the creek that bordered their property. They moved more slowly than they once had, but they still moved together, still found joy in each other's company after more than 20 years of marriage. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had not come back?" Alina asked, echoing a question she had posed years before. "If you had just stayed in Nevada or wherever Thomas Cotter took you, if you had never learned the truth?" "Sometimes," Gabriel admitted, "but I always come to the same conclusion. I was always meant to come back. Everything that happened, all the pain and displacement and lies, it was all leading me here. To you, to this life, to the family we built. I do not believe in fate exactly, but I believe in purpose. And my purpose was to come home, to reclaim what was stolen, and to create something good from all that loss. Eleanor stopped walking, turning to face him fully. The setting sun caught in her hair, turning the silver threads to gold, and Gabriel was struck anew by her beauty, by the force of his love for this woman who had chosen him, who had built a life with him, who had given him everything he had ever wanted without even knowing she was doing it. "My purpose was to wait for you," Eleanor said softly. "I did not know it until you arrived, but I was waiting for the moment when you would walk back into our lives and make everything make sense. You gave me purpose too, Gabriel. You gave me a reason to hope, to dream, to believe in happy endings." Gabriel pulled her close, kissing her with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never faded. "We are not an ending yet," he murmured against her lips. "We have years left, you and I. Years to watch our grandchildren grow, to see what our children build, to enjoy the fruits of all our labor." "I know." Eleanor smiled against his mouth. "And I intend to savor every moment of those years. But it is nice sometimes to look back and realize just how far we have come, just how much we have overcome." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Gabriel thought about his journey, about the arc of his life from stolen child to husband and father and grandfather. He thought about Thomas Cotter, long dead now, whose deathbed confession had set everything in motion. He hoped Thomas had found some measure of peace in his final moments, some forgiveness for the sin of buying and lying about a child. He thought about the bounty hunter whose name he had never learned, the man who had set the tragedy in motion by selling a toddler for profit. Gabriel had spent years angry at that nameless criminal, but the anger had faded with time. What was the point of rage when his life had turned out so well? When that terrible act had, in a roundabout way, led him to everything he valued most. He thought about his parents, about Matthias and Margaret Orson, whose love and loss had shaped his destiny even though he had never known them. He hoped they knew somehow that their son had come home, that the land they had built on was still in family hands, that their name was being carried forward by grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would never know the fear of being stolen, of having their identity erased. And he thought about Eleanor, always Eleanor, the constant center of his world. She had been the first face he had seen that truly felt like coming home. She had believed in him when he was nothing but a stranger with wild claims. She had loved him through uncertainty and struggle, through the building years and the settling years. She had given him children and partnership, and a reason to wake up grateful every single morning. As they reached the porch and paused to watch the last light fade from the sky, Gabriel pulled Eleanor close one more time. "Thank you," he said, words he had spoken countless times but never stopped meaning. "Always," Eleanor replied, her standard response, her promise that she would always be there, always be his partner, always be the answer to every question that mattered. They went inside together, into the warmth and light of the home they had built, the family they had created, the life they had earned through love and perseverance and faith in each other. And if Gabriel paused at the threshold one last time to look back at the darkening land, at the ranch that had been stolen from him, and then returned, at the legacy that would outlive him, it was only for a moment. Eleanor was waiting, his children and grandchildren were waiting, his life was waiting. He had been sold as a toddler, torn from everything that should have been his. But destiny, or love, or simple stubborn determination had brought him back to confront the truth, to reclaim what was lost, and to build something beautiful from the ashes of that old tragedy. He was Gabriel Orson, son of Matthias and Margaret, husband of Eleanor, father and grandfather, rancher and neighbor and friend. He was home. Finally, completely, irrevocably home. And that, Gabriel thought as he closed the door behind him and followed Alina into the golden lamplight, was the only truth that mattered.